Today I'm painting a portrait in Procreate, and that's my Facebook notification. Hi everyone, Steve Elliott here again. Today I'm working in Procreate. I felt I've neglected Procreate a little bit recently because of all the other apps I've been trying and using Art Studio Pro. So I thought I'd get back into it because, you know, let's face it, it is one stonking good app. And I wanted to do a portrait. This one is of my dad. I've painted him before. He's knocking on a bit now. He's 87 years old. Gets a little bit grumpy. Spends a lot of time on his own. So I thought I'd take him to the pub and we'd have a game of drafts. He's got a draft set. He's quite into it. So we took that with us to the pub, sat down with a pint, and then I thought, you know what? I can't resist this. I've got to get a photo of this. This is just going to be one nice painting. So that's the story behind it. Me and my dad going to the pub for a pint and a game of drafts. I've done this one slightly different to how I normally paint, because when I usually begin an oil painting, I put on a background colour, then I create a new layer and lock the original layer so that doesn't get touched again. What I've done different this time, and by the way, I use the grunge brush, the default grunge brush, to get the initial colours on. I put local colour over the whole of the painting, and then I started to paint into it. And that was a mistake. I didn't deliberately set out to do this, but what I noticed straight away was the colours on the background started to blend in with the new colours that I was putting on, and it added a very subtle well, it wasn't so subtle actually, it was a huge difference to what I normally do. So I think that's something I'm definitely going to be doing again, that is putting a ground colour on, but instead of creating a new layer and like working over it as though it was dry, I'm going to continue working into it as though it's a wet layer and adding colour to that. And also, I suppose, what I've tried to do here, I've tried to work over the whole of the painting, continually working over the whole of the painting instead of just sort of working on one bit and finishing up all the detail on that. Because I wanted to try and achieve an effect where no matter where I was in the painting, if I stopped, it would look like a finished painting. Well, I suppose clearly now it's not a finished painting because, well, I suppose it could be, I suppose, if it was a very abstract thing. But that's what I was trying to achieve. And I did struggle with the perspective a bit here. You could say I had to put some lines in, just to sort of get me back on track. And then I realised I'd made the squares too square and the perspective of them were distorted. So I had to sort of squash them up a little bit. There you see, tidying them up. So I spent quite a little bit of time just trying to get the squares right, because I knew once I'd got the squares on there, the drafts pieces, I suppose some people might call them checkers, but here in the UK we call them drafts. They would, once I got the squares in, the checkers or the drafts would just sort of fit in quite easy. Again, I'm going with a really loose brush effect. I'm continually striving to complete a painting with as few brush strokes as I can. Not always the case, because sometimes I'll spend quite a bit of time painting something and then think, oh my God, I've got too detailed, and then I'll overpaint it and knock it back. And that's pretty much what I did with these drafts pieces. I started painting them in and I got a bit fiddly with them. So then I just sort of started to knock the colour out. It might not look too fiddly there, and it doesn't look like there's a lot of detail. But trust me, I spent quite a bit of time playing around with those to get something that looked like I'd knocked them out in 2 minutes. The whole of this painting, by the way, from start to finish, took me just over, well, probably 2 or 3 minutes over 3.5 hours. And that's including tea breaks in between, because I do like a cup of tea when I'm painting. And I was listening to, while I was doing this, I was listening to a guy called Chet Baker, a jazz musician that was around years and years ago. He died of an heroin overdose, a long time ago. But he's a trumpet player and singer. He's got the voice of an angel. So I was listening to Chet Baker while I was doing this. I was in a very mellow place indeed. Just like throw that in to give you an idea of my state of mind while I was painting this. Really relaxed. And it came together really well. Portraits that my dad usually do. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because I've seen his face a lot over the years or what it is. But I do like painting older people. I much prefer well lived in faces with lots of wrinkles and creases and things. It makes for a lot more interesting painting, I feel. So as you can see, look, I am sort of spending a lot of time on these drafts pieces, and then I go in and sort of make them look a lot looser. I'm not too sure about this bottom right corner of the painting. I felt that it was, it looked unfinished, and I tried over painting it and I didn't like it. I took it out. In the end, I left it. I'm still not sure if it's right, but that's the way I went. So I've sort of got some sort of medium amount of detail, I suppose, over the general painting. So then I decided, let's get some shadows in on the face and let's start working on that and trying to get that to look something like. And you can see the concentration on my dad's face, because he had to beat me, because, you know, you can't have your son beating you at any game, really, can you? So he was determined that he was going to win, and he was concentrating. But so I tried to capture that. You see here on the face, I haven't got the angle quite right. I think I must have been painting it with the paper on the tilt or something, because the head, it's too vertical. It needs to be leaning more forward. So I will correct that in a minute. And I didn't use the liquify tool. I used the crop tool because I felt that I didn't want it distorting at all. I liked the effect I got, and I rotated it with the crop tool. There we go. There you see, I'm rotating it now. Just to sort of put a bit of a tilt on that, and then move it in a little bit. And I think that's a lot more to the photo, I guess. I'll tell you what I did like about this. I really loved the effect I got on the jumper, especially with that shadow on his arm. That sort of dark blue. That was like the initial roughed in colour, and I liked it so much. I thought, I'm not going to touch that because I really like it. And then I went in with the glass. I didn't know whether I was going to put that in or not initially, but I felt it needed it just to add some weight. And that's another thing. If you look at the composition, I'm kind of breaking all of the rules, because where you would normally put something, I've got his elbow, which would normally be your focal point in a painting, and all the actual detail is around the edges. So I suppose it's kind of very typical of a selfie, the sort of crop selfies that people do these days, although it's not a selfie, obviously, because I took loads of pictures of him, by the way, and I had him posing. I was going, just pretend you're taking that piece, Dad, but let me get a picture of him. You know what? They all failed miserably. The one that, the second I saw it, I knew was the one I was going to paint, was the very first photo I took, and it was when he was looking, you know, it was a natural pose, and I just caught it. He didn't even know I was going to take the picture, and he was just concentrating. So there's something. But look at the composition. It's all the detail is around the edges. So I suppose that just goes to show that you can break rules of composition. Although I have to say that dividing line is sort of maybe a little bit high for the ratio of thirds, but it's not far off it. And I suppose also the checkerboard goes a third of the way up. So maybe there are some rules being followed, but I think why it works, if you start looking at the checkerboard, then you look at his hand, and then you follow his arm, and you go up the forearm, and then up his arm, you've got a sort of a natural path that leads you to his face, which is the focal point of the painting. And I suspect that's why it works, because I think it works. I'm not going to ask you to say, do you think it works? Because you might put in the comments, no, it's not. It doesn't work. It's frigging awful. So, but I think it works. And, yeah, go on then. Put in the comments if you think it works or not. Cause, I am interested to find out what you guys think. It's always interesting to, get your opinion on things. I used the colour palette I used for this was the, one that, if you remember, if those of you that have been following me a while will probably remember the painting in the style of paintings I did, where I looked at a different artist each week and made a palette up. Well, one was by John Singer Sargent, and that is the palette that I'm using for this painting, except his palette was all browns, and I wanted to add some blue into it. Not because the photos got blue in, but I felt the blues and the sort of oranges and reds would really contrast well together and make a really powerful statement. So, and also the blue would, I know it's kind of a receding colour, but because it's sort of pale colours and the reds are muted and not bright reds, that actually brings him forward. So I'm working on the detail. I spent a long time on the mouth. I kind of struggled with the mouth because he has got it kind of screwed up a bit, I guess, and he's sort of with his concentration and everything. And that took me quite a while to get right. The eyes and the nose came together pretty quick. The mouth took me a little bit longer, sort of just pushing paint around and changing it and checking things all the time. I was checking that the mouth lined up with the nose and where it ended, where was it in line with the eyes, and all of those sort of tricks. I was checking those all of the time, just to making sure I'd got the proportions and shape right. But I think I get there in the end, and I'm quite happy with it. I'm quite chuffed with his wrinkled chin. He reckons he's good at drafts because he played a lot when he was in the army, when he did his national service in Singapore, I think. And when he was on guard duty, he says he used to play drafts. I thought you had to guard things when you was on guard duty. But according to my dad, he played a lot of drafts. And that's why he likes the game and why he's reasonably good at it. Just the brushes I used for this, by the way, I used the grunge brush to put the initial colour on. Then I went into the turpentine brush, and pretty much all of the initial painting was done with the turpentine brush. So all the rough brush strokes are done with the turpentine brush. Then I went into the artist brush. So these are all default brushes. And then I went into my own oil brush, which there is a free download for that. I'll put a link in the description below if you haven't got a copy of that and you want it, because I think that was the only brush I used that wasn't a default brush. The majority of the painting was done with default brushes, and then I went in right at the end, just putting in the final details with my own brush, just because it's you could get a sort of sharper and smoother lines, which you can't get with the Procreate brushes so much. They all kind of look a bit scratchy or a bit grainy. So you can see I'm using that there because it's got this softer edge on. And I always, whatever brush I'm painting with, I try and change the eraser and the blending tool to the same. I think it would be a cool feature if you could have an option where you say, set the blending brush and the eraser to the same brush that you're painting with. Because I do that a lot, and I think that would be a really cool feature in any painting app to be able to do that. I don't know any that does it. You have to sort of set them manually. If you change brushes a lot, that's, you know, can sort of slow your painting down and ruin the flow. What I'm doing now, I'm putting an highlight in on his arm and on the side of his face, sort of a bit of backlighting really. And then the darkest darks go into his eyes. So sort of almost black, but not black, just to do his eyelashes and his eyes. So, I mean, it's very subtle. You probably can't tell, but that is the darkest part of the painting, really. And then I just finally I felt that I signed it, of course, and then looked at it a bit and felt I just want to warm his skin up a bit. So I created a pinker, warmer colour, just for some highlights. Put that into the side of his face and put some of these wrinkles in with this sort of a nice warm pinky colour, just to make him look as though he's a bit warmer really and a bit more alive. So I'm sort of coming to the end now, just putting in the final brush strokes, and I'm really chuffed with this painting. I love it to bits. It's fun. It's something that me and my dad are doing every week now, and I really enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed sharing this painting with you. I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you have, a big thumbs up as always is much appreciated, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, because I have lots of videos like this and I would love to be sharing them with you. So hopefully I will see you in the next one. Bye.